those with disabilities. And I think the best way to do that is first to give you a picture of the state of affairs for those who live and work with disability. And then I'll share with you some activities that you can take with you today and incorporate right into your existing lives to help improve and change the picture for people with disabilities in our state and around the country. First, I'd like to ask you to think back to your childhood. Does anyone here remember encountering disability when you were a child, in a classroom or on the street? If you're like me, well over the age of 35, you probably grew up in a world where disability was hidden and shunned. In my school, there were no children who had significant physical or developmental disabilities. They were kept at home or institutionalized. There were children in my class who were called dumb or retards, who struggled day in and day out in the classroom and on the playground. And I'm certain, had my son been born when I was a kid, he would have been one of those children. Most likely those kids had what we now call learning disabilities. I remember that if I saw a person on the street who had a disability, I was told not to stare because it was rude, or worse yet, might have some kind of a bad effect on me, like it was contagious. Naturally, I stared. I wasn't used to disability. I rarely saw it, and I was curious. But disability was other. It was something to be pitied at best and mistreated at worst. So I never had any normal interaction with disability. And I'm expecting perhaps there are other people in this room who've had the same experience. But since we were kids, some things have changed and other things haven't in our culture's awareness and acceptance of disability. This is primarily because in the last 20 years, federal laws have been enacted to protect the civil rights of people with disabilities. Two of the most important are the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, which was supposed to end discrimination against people with disabilities, enacted in 1990. And then there's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, which is supposed to ensure that children with disabilities receive the same access to appropriate public education as their peers without disabilities. So I'm going to back up for a second and just give you a few disability facts to give you a sense of the scope of these laws and where they apply. There are more than 50 million people with disabilities in the United States, and they represent about 18% of our population. That means 1 in every 5 Americans has a disability. When you add family, friends, caregivers, therapists, service providers, healthcare professionals, organizations, some of which are here today, who have daily interaction with people who have disabilities, it vastly increases the size of the disability community. People with disabilities make up the fastest growing minority in the country. And the number of adults with disabilities age 65 and over is projected to double by the year 2030. Finally, with high rates of increase in some developmental disabilities, such as autism, the number of young adults with disability is expected to grow as well. So back to what the ADA and the IDEA have achieved. The ADA has helped people with disabilities to some extent in their struggle to be part of the community. But culturally, our acceptance of people with disabilities has remained much like it was when I was a kid, especially here in the state of Illinois. Nationally, there's an active movement away from large state institutions for people with disabilities, particularly developmental disabilities, and toward community-based living and living of choice. And thanks to the IDEA, by law, students with disabilities are educated in the most inclusive school settings possible, from preschool through high school. So your tax dollars, our tax dollars, go to ensuring that students with disabilities leave high school ready to become productive citizens at whatever level they can and want to be. So our students with disabilities now grow up expecting to self-determine and have some role to play in their futures. And they should have the same rights to choose where to live, to find gainful employment, to access technology, and to get around town that everyone else enjoys. But instead, in the state of Illinois, they fall off a figurative cliff. Illinois ranks 51st in the nation in providing the supports to allow people with disabilities to live in their community of choice. At dead last in the nation, the choice, by and large, here for a young adult with a disability, with a developmental disability, after completing high school, is to live at home with aging parents or to move into a state institution. There are very few options in between. They lose their friends and any hope of a productive, fulfilling adult life. Meanwhile, our state wastes precious resources to keep people with developmental disabilities in state institutions at a cost of approximately $165,000 per person per year. And that's versus approximately $50,000 per person per year to support a person with a disability to live a productive life in his or her own community. These are our tax dollars at work. Meanwhile, our state legislature is attempting to reduce the current state budget deficit by cutting human services by between 50 and 60%, a threat that's already forcing many support agencies to drastically reduce their already meager community-based programs to people with disabilities or to close their doors altogether. It's not surprising then that the unemployment rate for disabilities in Illinois hovers around 80%, and that's in stable economic times. In the face of these kinds of statistics, you might be tempted to throw up your hands and say, there's nothing I can do to serve this group. Instead, I say each of us can make a difference in a number of ways by finding small ways to welcome and include people with disabilities in the day-to-day community. We can change this picture in Illinois, and we can make our state a leader for the rest of the country. This is why I founded JJ's List, and I'll share some information about that along with some other service ideas that you can take back to your home or organization and put in place right away for little to no cost in very little time. One way that you can serve the disability community is to start using generally accepted language that is preferred by most people with disabilities today. It's something that we call person first or people first language, and it puts the person first. For example, you would say he has a disability instead of saying he's disabled. It seems like splitting hairs to some, and it seems like, well, what's the difference? But there is a difference. He's disabled is like saying the car is disabled. Disabled means completely broken, not functioning. But a person with a disability is not broken. He happens or she happens to have a disability and may require some supports or assistance to have a productive and fulfilling, filled day. But they're not broken. Person-first language also replaces outdated words such as handicapped or retarded with more accurate and appropriate words to refer to disability. For example, instead of saying the handicapped child, you would say the child with a disability. And there are many other things that we don't have time to get into when we're talking about interacting with a person who has a disability. But as small as it sounds, it makes a huge difference, not only in the lives of the people who have disabilities, but in our own perception of what disability is all about. So if you're interested in disability awareness and wanting to know more about some of the kinds of trainings that you can do, please feel free to stop by our table at the end. We do offer disability awareness training for organizations and groups and individuals. Another way that you can serve people with disabilities is to sign up to volunteer, obviously, for organizations represented here today. And I'll list the number that I was able to get to, but if I forget you, please raise your hand. The Center for Independent Futures, which serves to support people with disabilities to live in their communities, is at the JJ's List table. The West Suburban Access News Association, which is a huge resource website for just about anything you want to know about disability. Nutra Township, which is extremely dedicated to supporting the community's inclusion of people with disabilities. Misericordia is here. Clearbrook is here. Our Place, which is a brand new community center for adults and older teenagers with disabilities that just started in Wilmette. The Center for Enriched Living is here, and ACT is here, which stands for Adult Community Transitions. Did I get that right?
That's right.
There may be some others, but again, you can reach out and sign up to volunteer there.